Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Brews. In today's video, we're going to be having a look at Airfix's 1/72nd scale Bristol Beaufighter TF Mark 10. So this is a kit which recently won a poll on my YouTube and Patreon page for what you guys wanted to see next for an inbox review, and I will of course be doing a build video on this one eventually. So without further ado, let's have a look at the Airfix Beaufighter. So I've actually got two different iterations of this particular kit from Airfix. I have the most recent one from 2020, which I bought from my Air Museum's gift shop that I volunteer at. And I also have the original 2015 issue of this kit when it first came out, which I was given from a friend. So I'm going to have a look mainly at this kit because the tooling is exactly identical. The only thing that's really different is the box and the markings, so we'll have a look at the markings a little bit later. In terms of the boxes, they actually both feature the same camouflage scheme pretty much, with a grey Bristol Beaufighter with the D-Day stripes. The main difference is on the original one you have more of a front-on angle and you can see the aircraft is not carrying any rockets, whereas on the more recent edition you have the rockets and more of a side view of the aircraft. Otherwise, boxes are pretty much exactly the same, although the older kit has these nice renderings which were pretty common from Airfix at the time that this kit came out. Interestingly, there's actually a typo on this one that says 1/48 scale rather than 1/72nd scale, but this is only on the side, which is interesting. On the top here for both kits, you have a little bit of history about the Bristol Beaufighter, and you have the two schemes included. On the original kit, you get one flown by Flying Officer Maurice Exton, DFC, from 144 Squadron, and that one's in the typical grey Royal Air Force scheme with the D-Day stripes. And then you get a very nice Royal Air Force Southeast Asia Command from Burma in 1945, with the flat earth and the green and the light grey undersides and some very nice Burmese theatre roundels and the white stripes. The more recent kit has a scheme from the Royal Canadian Air Force, again in that sort of same grey as the Royal Air Force, although it looks like it has sky undersides and a little bit of brown patching on the tail. And then you have a rather interesting, although also kind of bland looking one from the Portuguese Navy, I believe, because it's got the little anchor. But it is from Portugal 1946, and it is also in a Royal Air Force kind of grey with the sky undersides. I believe that after the war they purchased a fair few from the British second hand, although interestingly it is a later version of the TFX or TF10 with the longer tail, and it looks like it's got a radar dome on the front there. So between these two kits you get some interesting schemes. You've got the more typical ones in the grey, and you also have something a little bit more unique in both of these kits. Because I got this one from a friend, there was actually some extra little bits in it, which I'll look at the very end, for making a Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighter. So yeah, again, I'll leave that till the end, but for now we'll have a look at the instructions and then have a look at the sprues. So opening up the older Beaufighter, you'll see that you have all of your sprues in a nice plastic bag here, and then inside that is another bag that contains the clear sprues. My newer Beaufighter from the museum actually is missing one of these because I actually bought it originally to help finish up a diorama I was working on for the museum, and I needed to pinch one of the canopies from here, so this is a more complete kit, hence why we'll look at it in a bit more depth. The instructions are also included, and they're pretty much identical between these two kits. You obviously get your decals as well, and with the one I got from the friend, you can see you've got a bit of a conversion set and some markings from a High Plains set, which we'll look at last. In typical Airfix form, the instructions are in a booklet format, which I am a big fan of because it's nice and easy to fit on your work desk, or at least I find that to be the case. On the front, you've got a little bit more history about the Bristol Beaufighter and its specifications, and obviously you have it in a few different languages, which is very handy. Opening it up, you have all of your warnings and also a assembly icon guide down the bottom here. And assembly starts with the interior of the aircraft in typical Airfix fashion. It looks like you start off with a floor section for the inside and two large wing spars, which is a little bit interesting. You don't always get aircraft with actual spars included, but this is, well, they're quite integral in the interior of the Beaufighter. And as you can see, for the pilot, his seat attaches directly onto the spar, and then you have what looks like a set of rudder pedals and a yoke. And Airfix have given you a pilot figure for both the cockpit for the pilot and also for the radio operator / rear gunner's position, or a navigator as well, I believe. And he gets his own seat and a little bit of a pedestal sort of assembly for the rear section here. Then on the side walls, you have a bit of detail molded into the fuselage halves, but you also have two separate pedestals which you have to install for all the throttles and the trims and all that sort of stuff. Then you have a tail wheel, and you either have the option to have it retracted, which is a special piece, or you can have it extended out. And as you can see, there's a fair bit of internal structure for both the inside of the bay and also the tail wheel itself there that is detailed. On the next page, you install a instrument panel, which the only details it has will come from the decal, which is pretty normal for Airfix kits of this time. And then once you've installed that, you can attach the other fuselage half, and then you slide that over the top of the interior floor section and the wing spars. On the other side, you then add this panel here, which includes all of the, I don't believe this variant had a bomb bay, but it's got some access hatches for the ammunition for the 20mm in the nose there, plus a little bit of detail for them. And you have an option at this stage to drill out several holes for a torpedo if you're making Scheme A. And also you have the option to drill out a hole for the stands. I believe this is from the time when Airfix had those black stands with the two kind of prongs. So you have two holes here, and you can either drill them out on the left or the right side. Or you can drill out in the center here for Scheme B if you want to mount the stand, since it doesn't have any torpedoes in the way. Moving on, we have a little bit of a interesting step here. For Scheme A, you have to sand a little sort of piece from the wing there. Otherwise, if you're doing B, then you leave it on. You also have the option here to drill out holes and add rockets if you're doing aircraft B. Same assembly on the other side for the wings, and once you've done doing all of that, you then join them together, and then you can slide them onto the wing spars there, and they should lock into place quite nicely by the looks of things. The ailerons come as a single piece here, which you can glue in whatever position you want. You'll be able to move it 26 degrees up or 15 degrees if you want some deflection, or you can just keep it neutral if you wish. So that could be quite interesting if you want the aircraft on the ground to have the controls sort of off to one side, or if you have it in a flight diorama, it might be interesting. As for the tail or the horizontal stabilizers here, you have a single piece which requires some panels to be added. Interestingly, there are two different pieces by the looks of things for them. Not too sure what the differences are. Perhaps it's the shaping by the looks of things. As I can see on this one, you have a little bit of a divot for the elevator to fit into. So yeah, two different versions there. Plus we have the tail section here, which is the same for both kits. But once you join those parts together and you've attached the two halves for the tail, you can attach them onto the fuselage, and you have a separate rudder here, which I imagine you could also pose however you wish. On the other side here we have the engines. I believe they were Bristol Hercules engines. Not too sure which variant was used in the TFX or the TF10. I don't quite know which version's correct, but I think it's the TF Mark 10. But anyways, so you've got a bit of detail here and assembly required for the engines. You've got a rear piece here with quite a large ring on it, and then you have the forward part here with the gearbox molded in along with the cylinders. And doing this twice, obviously, since it's a twin-engine aircraft. Once you've assembled the cylinders, you then have these three different cowlings to add on for the engine covers. Then you have a large centerpiece here, which gets attached to the front of the engine cowling. And then after you've put the exhaust system into place, you can attach that front piece into place. So it looks like you get quite a bit of detail for the engines. It might be a little bit of a fiddly assembly, so hopefully all the parts are well engineered and they fit together nicely. Otherwise it could be a little bit of a pain. But once the engines are assembled, you can then install them onto the aircraft, and then at this stage you also add the nose piece. There is a slight difference between the original kit and the 2020 issue with the Portuguese Air Force markings, in that with the nose you have the option for the Portuguese version to add a large radar. There's also some different air intakes offered for the Portuguese and the British or Canadian one included in the newer edition, which are not options in the original. But anyways, once you have the nose attached and the air intakes for the engines, you can then move on to adding the main landing gear. And in this kit you have the option to have it retracted with just the fairing doors being glued into place, or you can go the whole length and have the landing gear down by putting the two tyre halves together with the little hub there, and then assembling the struts, which look like they're a little bit complicated and fiddly, but hopefully being Airfix it should be quite well engineered. But basically you have one piece here for the struts, plus these two frames on the inside of the engine, and then there's another large kind of framework piece that attaches to those struts. And once that's assembled, you can add the tyre and then glue the fairings for the landing gear bay into place, although making sure they're in the open position. There's also a little exhaust piece, I believe, that fits to the back of the engine cowling, and then you basically repeat that assembly for the other set of landing gear. Optional torpedo here for Scheme A with a few little bits to add. It's got a very interesting looking tailpiece here, which I haven't seen before. I'm assuming it's more of a British thing, because the only other aircraft I've done with torpedoes are the Heinkel and the B5N2 Kate, and they only had a smaller kind of fin like that. So yeah, that's a little bit interesting. You attach the torpedo to the underside there if that's what you're going for. Otherwise, for B, you have the rockets, which consist of 8 rockets that have to get attached to their rail, and then you attach the railing onto a sort of base plate kind of thing here, and you have to do that for both sides and then attach it onto the underside of the wings there. That's almost it for assembly. There are some landing lights. You actually have 2 different versions. There's one that sort of has a frame in the middle of it for A, and then for the Burmese one you have a single one there. There's also these nav lights, which are done in clear parts by the looks of things, which is quite cool. And there's a little air intake here for part of the probably the oil cooling system, I'd imagine. On the outer part of the left wing, you've got a pitot tube, and then you have a single canopy for the pilot, and for the rear gunner, you have a little Browning machine gun, I believe, or like a 7mm one, that gets slotted in, and then you can add on top of that a sort of plexiglass covering. The propellers are able to be spun if you glue the large kind of piece at the back here to the propeller and don't glue it to this joining piece. I think it's nice I've done it this way because it means you can obviously leave your propellers off till last, which I know is pretty good if you're an airbrusher and you like to hold the aircraft using a cocktail stick through the middle of the engine there. And it keeps it out of the way anyways for assembly and painting, so it's nice that they've done it that way. And it even looks like your the gearbox piece that the propeller is fixed to is keyed so that it will line up with the engine details there, which is a nice touch. Then we've got a little air intake filter, or perhaps a part of the torpedo sighting system, I'm not too sure, as it's only for the A version. And finally, you've got a little radio antenna, and that's pretty much it for assembly. The only other difference besides the engines and the nose cone that we've looked at previously with the more recent kit is you also have the later version of the Beaufighter's tail, which is extended for the Portuguese version, and there's also some extra parts for the Portuguese aircraft for the front section here with the this extra little bulge behind the pilot. Otherwise though, pretty much identical assembly, and the only things that are different are those smaller little optional parts. And both of them have at the very back the 2 different marking guides in colour, which is nice, and all of the decal positioning. And as you can see, these 2 schemes are pretty much identical between these kits, and then they have their more unique scheme, which for the older kit was the Burmese one, and for the more recent one is the Portuguese one. All of these are pretty nice looking schemes, and the instructions are pretty clear for all of them. I must say I'm not a huge fan of the Portuguese marking scheme. It looks a little bit kind of bland to me without the roundels on the side, and it is just the same grey scheme that you get for the Canadian one. Although I'm sure some people are really happy that they got something a little bit more unique. And I do quite like the Southeast Asia Command Beaufighter with the white stripes and the different dark earth and dark green camouflage on the upper surface. So I think you've got some nice choices between these 2 kits. Moving on to the plastic parts, as you can see there's a reasonably large number of sprues for an aircraft of not a massive size, but sort of a medium size for a World War II aircraft. And as you can see, we have, for the old kit, 4 sprues moulded in this sort of light grey plastic. I did double check that there were no differences between the new edition and the old one, and there is one. The new kit gets this extra sprue with, as you can see, the longer radome for the nose, a strange looking bomb fuel tank or torpedo thing here, I believe, and also the different tail and a few differences in terms of these little racks here and some different tail wheels. Otherwise though, they're the exact same sprue, and what you get apart from that extra sprue in the newer kit is the same. So I'll start off with frame A since it was on the top, and as you can see over here we have some smaller detailed parts such as the air intakes for the wings, part of the gearbox system where the propeller attaches, Looks like a little antenna, and then the little pieces that go inside here for the propeller to attach to. More air intakes, and then some little kind of fairings. Plus we've got the front of the nose there, the tyres, which as you can see are moulded with a little bit of weighting to them, which is handy. It means you don't have to sand them if you want to get a little bit of that weighted look in the tyres if you've got the aircraft on the ground. It is a bit unfortunate they don't have them more full, so that if you wanted the aircraft, say, coming into land with no weight on the tyre, you had a full tyre. But I can see that most people would probably, if they're going to bother with the landing gear, have the aircraft on the ground. So it is nice that they've done that for you so you don't have to sand it. Some of the engine parts here, which are not an awful lot of detail on them, but they do look quite cleanly moulded. We've got a bit more here with what looks like the main instrument panel being just a flat piece. It'll get its details from the decal. The main front part of the engine cowling with some little intakes there as part of the exhaust. Then we have our cylinders, which look a little bit basic. They're sort of just some raised lines over the circled shapes, but they look pretty serviceable still. Then we've got the front section here of the cylinders, so the second row at the front. And looks like on the sides here there's a little bit more detail. There's some rivets and looks like some joining parts and a few little extra marks, so they look reasonably detailed. Then we've got the sides of the engine cowlings, and they look quite nice. You've got these little bulges on the side there, and you've got some very nicely done cow flaps, which look quite appropriately thin. Looks like they're in the open position, so I don't know if most people would be happy with that. I would imagine when they're flying they'd be a little bit more closed, but on the ground they would definitely have them open to keep them nice and cool. The engine, that is. The tailpiece here with some recessed panel lines on it, looking quite nice. All of our 8 rockets there, which are all looking pretty good without any imperfections to speak of. Got the cockpit floor, which is pretty basic. There's sort of just a bit of raised framework here. Otherwise, it's just the guide pins to help line up the parts that will give it the actual detail. Nothing really on the underside other than these little bulges where those bits would go into. And then we have a very nicely done underside for the fuselage. And as you can see, they've done a few little rivets along these recesses, and all of the access hatches are done with recessed panel lines. For the ejector ports, they've actually done it so that you can fully see through the plastic, so it's a proper hole. That should be pretty good, I reckon. You probably won't see too much, really. Once the fuselage floor is in place, it should be quite nice and dark, and it gives it that nice bit of depth. Speaking of depth, the front ports where the cannons come out of look pretty nice indeed. They're very deeply done. So sprue A is looking pretty nice. Here we have what I believe is it sprue B? Yes, it is. It's sprue B, and this one contains some of the framework for the landing gear. You've got the pilots there, which are a bit generic and very typical of the Airfix early to mid 2000s, but they're looking quite nicely detailed, I reckon. We've got the rails here for all of the rockets, which aren't massively detailed, but they're all cleanly molded, which is good. A few more little bits here for the landing gear, and that looks like it's a little bit fragile hanging there, but the detail on them looks all right. We've got the base kind of part here that the rocket pods would attach to, which again, pretty basic but nice and cleanly molded. We have the strange kind of piece here for the back of the torpedo, which looks pretty good. A little bit of a seam line on it, which will have to get cleaned up, but given the fact that that's how they're attached to the sprue, you're probably going to have to sand that anyways to remove the excess sprue. Here we have the covers for the landing gear bays, either the ones that are in the opened position, or you have these single pieces if you have them closed. Some nice detailed fabric control surfaces here, very nicely done, I reckon. And there's a little bit of recessed detail for the trim tabs on the ailerons and the rudder. So yeah, they look really quite fantastic there. Some very nice sinking and depth in them. And the fuselage pieces here look pretty good. They're all recessed panel lines with a few little raised areas where appropriate. All looking quite good and very cleanly molded. There's no imperfection, and other than a few little bits of flash here and there, nothing too major. On the inside, we have ribbing for the entire of the interior there. You're not going to see too much of this part, I reckon, although you will still have to paint it because there's no real bulkhead between the pilot and the radio operator slash gunner's position there. Some very nice recessed and raised details for the side of the panel there, including a little bit of wiring and the throttle controls, all looking quite good. And as you can see, they've got some nice big holes here to help line up the tail wheel. There are a fair few ejector pin marks on the inside here, but they're not really going to be that noticeable because those ribs are going to cover up everything quite nice, and you probably really won't see too much of it once the aircraft is sealed up. Pilot figures from the back here also look quite good. There are a few sink marks, but if he's sitting in a chair, you're not going to really be able to see that. So yeah, any imperfections on this sprue are nicely hidden, and the quality on them looks really quite good. Jumping a little bit out of order, we have sprue D here, which contains the wings, and there's also these parts which are, I believe, for the horizontal stabilizers panels, but they're pretty basic but nice and cleanly done. The wings themselves are all recessed panel lines with a couple of little raised bits here and there, and yeah, they look really quite nice. There's a few little imperfections in the panel lines on this wing here and on that side there, but nothing that can't be fixed with a little bit of scribing. And yeah, overall the access hatches look quite good. I don't know if this version of the Beaufighter had wing-mounted cannons or machine guns, I believe, but judging by these what look like ejector ports for shells, I'd say that they possibly did on this version. Interestingly, there are 4 on this side and only 2 on that side. Although this side also has the landing lights, so maybe they did it that they had 2 machine guns on that side and 4 on the other. On the upper surface, there are a few extra raised marks here for this panel, which interestingly has what looks like perhaps an access port just for the wings landing light and also another for the armament. But on this side, it's just a single panel there, so it's not a perfectly symmetrical aircraft, which is interesting. And you've got more access hatches with some raised panel lines on the left side here as well. Plus, you've got this little sort of raised line here, which I believe you have to sand off for particular versions. And some nice recessed rivets or access hatches and riveting detail on the engine nacelles there, which look pretty good. And a little bit of raised framework for the interior of the landing gear bay for the underside there, so looking pretty good. Again, all of the flashing is pretty minimal, and the ejector pin marks are all in nice invisible spots, so looking pretty good for sprue D. Finally, we have sprue C here, which contains a fair few small details. On the bottom here, you have the distinct I guess, very sharp and pointy looking exhaust system that's pretty common on the Bristol engines. I believe their main purpose is for dampening the flames, so making them a little bit less visible during the night, so they look quite nice. Here we have the machine gun for the rear position with some nice recessed details on it for the barrel rifling and the cooling holes and all of that, so that looks pretty good. A very nice yoke there for the pilot with some little buttons and details on it, which look pretty good. A pitot tube and some antennas. Looks like some little brackets for attaching the torpedoes. Then we've got the rudder pedals here with a little extra piece sticking up there to help line it up, I believe. But that looks pretty good. Some little air intakes. Looks like that floor piece for the radio operator seat to go on. Looks like the propeller system for the torpedo, and then the torpedo itself, or the main body of it, is here with some nice little recessed details on it. Very nice little sidewall details here for the pilot. You've got some very strong recessed and raised detailing for the various controls and the trim wheels and all of that, which look pretty good. Got some extra parts here for the exhausts, so I believe that's the base piece, and these parts will then attach onto that. Very nicely detailed main landing gear struts, and they're pretty nicely moulded without any imperfections. Got a pilot seat here with some nice fabric texturing on the back, and then a slightly more basic gunner's seat, although there is still a little bit of a fabric kind of texture on it. It's just not quite as defined. Here we have the main spars with a little bit of raised detailing on them. More so on this side for the rear gunner's position, and then that kind of little part here for attaching the seat. They've done an ejector pin mark right behind that, but that shouldn't really be visible once you've got the chair in place there, so that looks pretty good. Then we've got our 2 different elevators, and as you can see, the only real difference seems to be the shape of the elevators. On one goes inwards slightly. Otherwise, they're both the late kind of Beaufighter, I should say, style with the dihedral at the top there, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then on the bottom here we have the propellers with some very nice detailing on the adjusting parts there for them, and very nicely done tail wheels there with some good details for the framework. And finally we've got some exhaust or intake pieces here for the engine with a mixture of raised detailing for that top spine part there, and then a little bit of recessed detail on the base. So yeah, sprucey, looking quite nice and detailed, and just like the rest of the kit, seems to be very nice and cleanly moulded. The last sprue to have a look at is the clear sprues, and they're in a separate bag here, which I'm happy with because that protects them a little bit in the packaging from being scratched by the other sprues. But opening up, as you can see, in typical Airfix form, they are pretty good. Interestingly, there's a bit of an oily kind of feel to these sprues, so they're definitely going to need a nice good wash before I start building the model. The Beaufighter's got quite a lot of curvy kind of shapes for its transparencies. Even the pilot's windows are very heavily curved. But I think Airfix have done a pretty brilliant job for doing these rather challenging parts, because as you can see, they're very nice and crystal clear without any scratches or imperfections, other than what looks like a bit of a scratch mark on this window. If you can see on the side, left side of the pilot's window there's a bit of a scratch. Otherwise, though, looking pretty good, and the distortion is, yeah, if you can see my finger through there, pretty minimal for the pilot's window. Similar story for the bubbles for the gunner's position. On both of them there's a lot of curves and very complex shapes, but there isn't an awful lot of distortion, and although they are reasonably thick for plexiglass at this scale, they are pretty thin in terms of clear parts, so honestly pretty good, I reckon. And I do love that the navigator's lights are done in clear sprue there, so you can paint them with a transparent paint and it should look pretty nice. Two different types of landing gear light there cover, and you also have this extra little bulge, which I believe was on earlier Beaufighters, covering the some of the antennas at the front there. So yeah, all of these clear parts looking pretty good. The last thing to cover that comes with the basic kits are the decals, and as you can see, they're both printed by Cartograph, which the name speaks for itself. They're going to be of exceptional quality. Both of these kits come with common stencils, which look to be exactly the same for both of these editions. The main differences come when you get to the individual schemes, and as you can see, for A and A, for both kits, you have pretty much the exact same roundels, plus the red lettering, pretty typical of the Royal Air Force, although I believe this one is Canadian. And then for both of the second schemes in this kit, you get a little bit more of a unique take on the Beaufighter. For the B one, you have these nice Pacific Theatre roundels with the light blue on the middle, which I think look pretty nice. And then you've got a little bit of red lettering and some individual codes there, plus some yellow markings. And for the Portuguese Air Force, you have the Portuguese roundel, a little kind of anchor symbol, and then you've got this green and brown kind of tailpiece there. So yeah, the decals, as you can see, for both of these kits are really nicely done. All of the common stencils can be read, and yeah, detail on them looks pretty good. You can sometimes still get a little bit of silvering on these decals, so I do recommend a gloss coat still, but on the whole, Cartograph decals are really damn good, and both of these kits have them, so definitely a plus. Although that's it for the Airfix Beaufighter kits, there is also this conversion set and some decals which came from High Plains that I got with the Beaufighter I got from my friend. So it looks like what you get is this rather poorly molded set of elevators or horizontal stabilizers, which are for the early version of the Beaufighter, which were actually straight without that dihedral. But compared to the kit ones, they're pretty similar in terms of the shape on the outer part there. They've got that same kind of cut in there, and they've got the fabric surface, although around about here where the trim tab ends on the earlier version, it sort of cuts inwards and you don't have that high angle present. These ones would have been attached and sat 90 degrees from the fuselage rather than the dihedral on these later ones. So it's nice that it comes with this little set for converting them, although it is a little bit basic. I think I'm going to be tempted to just, if I want to do the RAF version, cut up the included elevator and just glue it on straight if that's possible. Otherwise, you also get the nice set of markings for the Royal Australian Air Force, and there's 3 different aircraft you can choose from for this kit, either A1987, A1940, and A1934. The quality of high plane decals tends to be alright, although this is a rather old conversion set. I believe there would be a much more newer and more polished one with resin available at the moment. The number for this particular set is D4803. But it does include these very nice guides to converting the aircraft and some very nice marking guides for the different schemes that you can do with this conversion set, and also some very nice reference photos are included showing the early Australian Beaufighter's different tail, and yeah, it talks a little bit about some of the history of the aircraft and goes into a little bit of detail about these particular aircraft and what they were painted, and yeah. Honestly, a nice little set, and although the elevators included are rather basic, I believe that there is a more modern version that's done in resin, which is a bit better quality. Although for these, honestly, I reckon, like I've said, you can just convert the original kit's tails. So both of these kits, as I've mentioned, are pretty much identical. The only real difference, as you see, was some extra parts are included in the newer edition of the Beaufighter. I believe it is starting to become a little bit harder to get a hold of this older edition, so it's probably a bit easier to get this one. But both of them I would definitely recommend. There's some really nice details on them. Maybe not perfect, and maybe there are some more advanced kits out there, but honestly, out of the box, you can get a very decent looking Beaufighter, and I'm sure you can get plenty of conversions and upgrade sets if you want to take this kit the next step further, so it's a pretty good base. I do kind of prefer the older kit just because I really like that Far East Command camouflage scheme, although honestly both of them are pretty cool. Originally, when I got the first Beaufighter, it was only to get that spare part to finish off that diorama for the air museum I was working on. But I did want to obviously build a Beaufighter, so I was happy to get a whole kit rather than just a canopy online. Although originally I was going to probably do it in Royal Air Force colours, like the one included, or Canadian. But then I started working on the Battle of Milne Bay script, and I also picked up the second Beaufighter because of it. Because at the end of the battle, there was a couple of Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters that joined in and did some anti-shipping stuff. They didn't really appear until very late though, so not a massively important aircraft in the battle, but still definitely a part of it. So I'm not sure if I'll do both of these in a Royal Australian Air Force scheme, or if I'll just do one and then do this one in a Royal Air Force scheme. I have to admit, I am a bit of a sucker for the twin-engine props from World War II. They're a bit of a unique development of the aircraft for combat, because obviously these days now you can sort of get a powerful enough engine that you can make a fighter or a bomber as well. But at the time, usually for a multi-role aircraft, you had to have two engines, and I think they look quite attractive, and the Beaufighter definitely looks quite cool and unique. So yeah, happy to have both of these aircraft, and I'm definitely looking forward to doing a build video on them in the future. Definitely a RAF one. As for the other one, it's to be decided still. So that's it for this video on having a look at the Beaufighter. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you got something out of it, please be sure to leave a like, and also subscribe to the channel if you really want to help things out. Massive shout out, as always, to my wonderful patrons for helping me fund buying these kits and the products I use to build them. My Aviator and Tanker tier patrons will now be getting a discount in my Cult shop, where I sell my 3D printed files. I'll be doing some more videos on some 3D printing stuff as well in the future, as well as some build videos, and I've also got some voice work done for another animation, so hopefully I'll be able to release that later this month. Thanks again for watching, and until the next video, as always, take care and model on.